Hi folks, this is a tutorial I've been actually wanting to do for some time. It's basically a tutorial on the way to use the weighting system in FrontOFFICE, the weightings that you see in set classes, which is your year weighting, and it controls the percentage inputs that you put in during the year, and how they combine together to come at a final year mark. And there are umpteen ways to do this, and it all depends on how you enter marks and what marks you are reflecting on your report. And I'll take you into that side of things as well so that you can see what I'm talking about. But basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to start off with a more comprehensive version. Many of you are going with different versions, more simplified versions if you like, and what I'll do is I'll start at the top and work my way towards those versions. But I think with looking at the more comprehensive view, you can actually get a better idea of how it actually is set up. And then, as I say, we'll go through various options, and you'll more than likely see what option you're basically using. In many cases, you guys have already, you're not going to be changing your weighting to, let's say, the comprehensive version that I show you. But it's going to give you an idea of how it works anyway, and more comprehension. By the time if you're using a simple scenario, for instance, where you're entering the final promotion mark directly into one of the term columns in FrontOFFICE, and you're therefore using your weighting so that only that term column is referenced, then that is you'll be able to understand that far more readily and what's going on there if you understand the more comprehensive versions. So this is it's kind of a generic mark breakdown, sort of, in the CAPS mold, and it's actually a file in the Dropbox folder, in the academic folder, called Generic Markbook 2016, but I'm going to change the name to say Generic Mark Breakdown. So what I'm going to do is just roughly take you through these columns at the top here. So essentially in term 1 you've got test 1 and prac 1 out of 30 and 50. It's a total of 80. And then the mark showed on the report is converted to a mark out of 100. Test 2 you've got 50 and 30. Again, test and a prac. Okay, that gives you a total of 80. And then what it wants to do is take that mark and convert it to a mark out of 25. So that's the SBA component for term 2 exclusively. And then a June exam out of 150. So we put a total of 150, and that mark, for the purposes of the June 2 mark, is converted to a mark out of 75. And that 25 and the 75 are added together to give you a mark for the term 2 mark out of 100. Again, in many cases, for instance, you have already calculated this and you enter simply a term 2 mark in FrontOFFICE. In some cases, people enter a term 2 mark in FrontOFFICE and a term 5, a June exam, into the term 5 column. We'll dive into that a little bit later. Then in term 3, you've got a mark, again, a test and a prac, 50 and 30, total of 80. In term 4, a test and a project, totaling 150. And basically, in this mock example, your total SBA for the year totals at 540 marks. Okay, if you add all these together, okay, you get 540. Then in this example, there is a prac exam, so kind of could be oral component in your English subjects, or a PET type component in the technical subjects. As I say, it's just a mock setup, and they put this as a thing out of 60. But then what they do is they've got this SBA and prac component. In other words, this and this together. Okay. Now, although that's 540 marks and that's 60 marks, what they've actually done here is they take the 60 marks and they convert it to a mark out of 15, and they take the 540 marks and they convert it to a mark out of 25. So actually, this prac exam, although it's out of 60 marks, it's contributing 15 out of the 40 when it combines the two. And this 540 is converted to a mark out of 25 to represent out of that 40. Those two marks are combined to give you your 40, and then your June exam, at least your final exam, which could be 2 papers, but we'll combine them to 1 paper for the purposes of demonstration, which is there. And that is converted to a mark out of 60, and those 2 marks are thrown together to give you a final year mark. So now if we take these marks at the bottom here, what we can do, let's just look at it up until the point of the SBA calculation. So the first thing we can do in terms of calculating a weighting here is find the lowest common factor for all of these amounts. Okay, the simplest thing you can see there is to divide by 10, so you get 8, 8, 15, 8, and 15. Okay, and then what we want to do is to say, okay, that total there, right, that total there must represent 25 out of the 40 marks when combined. So the mark out of 60 must represent the other 15 out of the 40. So how does that compare as a weighting compared to the total of that? Well, if you do your calculation and you say basically the total of that, so we can do it here, so it's 8 plus 8 plus 15 plus 8 plus 15, okay, gives you 54, and we want to know how 54 over what over x equals 25 out of 40. So if you solve for x, you end up getting 25, you get 25 out of 40, so it's 40 times the total of that, which was 54, okay, equals that, memory plus that. Okay, so it's memory, so it's 2,160 divided by 25, okay, gives you a total of 86.4. Okay, right, so in other words, for the SBA, which totals up at 54, out of 86.4 represents the 25 out of 40, and we can do this. Okay, so if I say, let's add that to the memory. So if I work it out as a percentage, so I say 54 divided by 86.4 equals that, and we multiply that by 100. Okay, so it equals 62.5%. Okay, so let's just add that to the memory. Okay, and now we want to say 62.5% equals what out of 40. So we're testing to see if it equals 25 out of 40. To see if we got that, if that 86.4 represents the correct proportion, and I'll show you what I'm talking about now. For those of you who might be getting lost at this point, just bear with me. So, okay, so let's just do it this way. So, we know that it equals 62.5%, 54, the 54 out of the 86.4 that we calculated to be the total, 62.5%. So if I was to take 25 out of 40, okay, remember that the prac is counting 15 out of the 40, so this SBA is counting the remaining 25. So if we said 25 out of 40 multiplied by 100, we can see that it does indeed equal 62.5%. So essentially what we've arrived here is that if this total is 54, okay, and I minus it from the 86.4 that we calculated, that would be the total, 86.4 minus 54, meaning that this prac exam, if you were to enter it as a percentage into a column in front office, you would weight it, a rather strange weighting of 32.4, in order for it to equal 15 out of 40. Okay, so again, if I was to take 32.4 as a percentage out of the total now of all the weightings, which is 86.4, okay, divided by 86.4 equals that, multiplied by 100. So this, what it's actually saying is that this prac exam out of 60 ends up counting 37.5% of the whole year so far, the SBA plus the prac. And again, we can test that by saying 15 divided by 40. In other words, that we know that that's what it ends up equaling, because it gets converted to a mark of 15 out of 40, equals that times 100, times 100, 37.5%. So that weighting therefore is correct. Then if we apply the same now to the final exam, okay, we know that the final exam now must count 60, and the SBA and prac together counts 40, right? So again, if we were to add this up, okay, so bear with me, 32.4, see that plus, we know that it's 54, so we know it's 86.4. Okay, so we want to work out what 86.4 is as what 86.4 out of what is 40%. Okay, so we arrive at an amount of 86.4 over x equals 40 over 100. Okay, so solve for x, divide by 86.4, 100, multiply by 86.4 equals that, plus 40 divided by that, that divided by 40, okay, equals 216. So in other words, that is the total that the whole year needs to be for the total of the rest of the year to equal 40%. Okay, in other words, if we were to say, add that to the memory, if we were to say 86.4, which is the total for the year, divided by 216, multiplied by 100, gives you 40%. So that means that if we take the 216 and we minus the 86.4, we get 129.6. Again, a rather strange weighting, but we'll narrow that down some more. So your final end of the year, you would weight, if you enter that as a percentage into front office, you would give that weighting 129.6, and that 129.6 divided by 216 equals 60%. Okay, so that would be your 60%. Now obviously, as I say, you've got your decimals in here, which represents a rather strange number. So the easiest way to raise this to the highest common factor is to just multiply by 10 to get the decimal out. So you get 80, 80, 150, 80, 150, 324, 1296. And we can lower this, we can find the lowest common factor dividing by 2, which is 40, 40, 75, 40, 75, 162, and 648. And once again, if we add these numbers up, okay, we get 432 out of a total of 180 divided by 180 equals 40%. Okay, so you can see that the rest of the year is still equaling up to 40%, and if you take the 648 that we calculated over here and you divide it by the total of 1080, all of them for the year, it's your 60%. So that is essentially a very comprehensive way of actually being able to capture a lot of the marks into FrontOFFICE, which is why I'd begun to extend FrontOFFICE to 10 term columns, as you well have noticed. And with some of you wondering why there's so many noughts, extra noughts on your weighting. Now, you could therefore in FrontOFFICE have a situation where you then captured this term 1 mark as a percentage, remembering that that percentage is comprised of a contribution of 30 and 50, so it retains that weighting in it. So therefore convert it back to a raw score using the weightings I've provided will retain that integrity, even though you're entering it as 1 mark, plus the integrity or its weighted contribution through the year. So hypothetically, as I say, you could have entered a term 1 mark into FrontOFFICE, a term 2 mark into FrontOFFICE, a June exam mark into FrontOFFICE, or these two combined. It's possible. Okay, then you would combine these weightings. So a June exam, many people enter into the term 5 column, a term 3 mark into the term 3 column, a term 4 mark into the term 4 column, which is the class mark. Okay, then into term 6 you could enter that prac exam. Okay, and into term 7 you could put the final exam, or you could even break this down into 150 and 150 and enter a term 7 and term 8, and then your weightings would be 648 divided by 2, which would be 324 each. But okay, as I say, for the purposes of simplicity, we'll just pretend it's entered as 1 into the term 7. Now, if you were to do it this way, hypothetically, you could have a report, and I quite like a report like this because it's kind of it's a year report and a term report at the same time. It kind of evolves during the year, so through the year. So imagine you're just in term 1, and so all that we simply do is we don't worry about what the year weighting is or anything like that. You would simply, this report would reference whatever you captured in that term 1 column. Okay, as you can see there, it references term 1, and then in term 2 the mark that you would have entered into as the term 2 class mark, okay, is simply referenced, because you remember you're entering it as a percentage, so it's nice and simple. All it does is reference the term 2, and then it references term 5 for the mid-exam, okay, which back to our example would have been this one here. Okay, again, no weightings are coming into play because it's referencing them specifically. Now you could, hypothetically, at this juncture, have another block in between this mid-exam and term 3 as a year-to-date mark. Or, actually the way it works in FrontOFFICE is this year actually is a running total for the year. So you could hypothetically, before you set up your year weightings like we've calculated here, just run the same principle that I've done across those 3 and have a weighting sitting in your set classes of whatever those 3 contributions make up. So you would have something like 8, 8, 15, and then 0, 0, 0, 0, because at that point in the year you wouldn't be dealing with any other marks. And so you would then have a cumulative or a year-to-date mark, which this mark 6p always does. Don't get folks get confused by the 6 that's in here. It's got nothing to do with term 6. All right, it's merely a name that we adopted way back when. And what it is a calculated field, and it constantly just runs. It's always calculated as marks are entered, and it can, through that manipulation of the weighting, represent any mark that you want. And that's actually why I keep on talking about the powerful, nature of the flexibility that is actually at your fingertips when using this. So in the middle of the year, you would be sitting with your weighting at, as I said, something like 8, 8, 15, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, and then these 3 marks would be represented, and then your year-to-date mark, would be represented as this report was at term 2. Then come the end of the year, you start entering your term 3 and 4 on prac, and we'll go through those a little bit now, and this mark 6p, then you would change your weighting, okay, come the end of the year, to be the weighting we calculated, and that year-to-date mark would then adjust itself to be the new year mark, and that ultimately would be your promotion mark. So as we progress through the year, once again, term 3 rolls around, and you would be entering the test and the prac mark, term 3, okay, as a percentage, of course, and we simply once again reference that directly. Term 4, same thing. Then again, that prac mark is entered as a percentage. That's the beauty of using the weighting. You just enter the percentage into FrontOFFICE. There's no worries about conversion or anything like that. That is the mark that appears on the report. Okay, so that prac exam would come there, and through the weighting, it's still, even though you've entered as a percentage, through the weighting that's involved, it still carries its impetus when calculating this final mark. Then again, as you see, we put the final mark into term 7. Okay, and again, you enter that as a percentage. There's your term 7. Okay, I've written the terms there above them, 2, 5, 3, 4, 6, 7. And then, of course, the level operates according to the year-to-date mark. But, I mean, that's just a hypothetical report. And it's just to show you, it's kind of like blending all the term reports into one, so that you kind of see things across the whole year. I don't have to jump from term report to term report. So that is, yeah, I mean, that is pretty much a fairly comprehensive way of entering the marks, and you'd be able to show all those marks on the report. And you could even have another calculation on the report, or in the query that runs the report. We could build, a calculation. Reports are custom, so a calculation could, in theory, be built up to show this mark here, the SBA total, SBA prac total. So it would be possible even to build that in. Now, in many cases in your schools, teachers have been running their mark books, and they've got various combinations going on here according to the CAPS documents, etc., etc. So, you might not have been following this sort of principle. As I say, you, for instance, might have entered just the term 2 mark in term 2. That's no problem, because you would have calculated the things that you would have calculated from your mark books, and the report, your term 2 report, would then just be referencing the term 2 mark. You would have combined the mid-exam with it, so it wouldn't be looking at the term 5 mark, and your term 2 aggregate would be showing the term 2 aggregate, would be the aggregate of your term 2 mark. Now, if, just returning to that example slightly, I was talking about a mid-year calculation, your year-to-date, following the weighting of something like 8, 8, 15. Again, if you didn't want the term 1 to be included, it would be 0, 8, 15. But we're actually diving into an area that is not quite relevant right now. What we're concerned about is the year weighting. So to get actually to my point, in is that what you might find is that you're not actually looking at the marks that you've been entering through the year. You're not looking at actually calculating those marks to arrive at your final mark. In other words, you're not using front office to calculate the final mark based on the mark entries that you've had. Because remember, at the end of the day, the mark entries you're putting into front offices are essentially for display purposes on the report. In fact, I've often said I feel, initially when front office was developed, these columns were called term 1, 2, 3, 4. And then we had a scenario where, as the program evolved, people wanted to enter a June exam, so we made term 5, and then a final exam, so we made term 6. And then it became apparent that you could actually manipulate these things any way you wanted. So essentially, we should have called these columns report display 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And I think next year we're going to probably label them that. They'll stay exactly as they are, but we'll just label them differently for comprehension purposes. Anyway, so you might actually find that, I know in some schools, for instance, what they've decided is, okay, we're actually going to have the teachers calculate an SBA score for the year, and we're going to enter that score into the term 4 column, okay, and we're going to weight the term 4 column 40%, and then the final, okay, so we'll write 40% there, and then we're going to enter into the term 6 column, we're going to enter the exam score, the final exam score, and we're going to weight that 60. Okay, in that case, you can find the lowest common denominator, lowest common factor, which is 2 and 3. Okay, and if you don't believe me, 2 plus 3 is 5, and 2 out of 5 is 40%, and 3 out of 5 is 60%. So your weighting would be then 0, because you're not regarding any of these scores. You've already entered your final calculated scores. 0, 0, 0, okay, and then, okay, this term 5's out of place, so your weighting would be term 1, 2, 3, 0, 0, 0, 2, because that's the SBA mark that you've entered, okay, term 5 is 0, and your final mark, your exam mark is 3, so it'd have 0, 0, 0, 2, 0, 3, okay, and or you may have decided, no, actually we are entering the final promotion mark into the term 4 column, and you could even say we are actually entering the final exam mark as well, because it's possible to go into front office and print a FET 6 schedule, for instance, which would show specifically only what you had entered into the term 6 column. Okay, if you go and look at these schedules, so that's how these schedules run. They run in a similar sense to the way that I've just showed you in that report. The 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 schedules, they represent whatever you've captured into those term columns, and the FET year schedule year depends on that mark 6P, that year-to-date mark. So the FET year schedule could, if you were running your year-to-dates as I showed you for like a mid-year instance, for example, that FET year schedule would actually be a mid-year schedule. You can do it like that's how it's designed, and some folks have. So let's just say that you decided that we're going to enter the promotion mark into front office, but we're going to enter the promotion mark into term 4, but we do want to record the exam mark. In our schools that do it like this, we do want to record this exam mark because we do want to have record of it, and we do want to print schedules for that. So then your weightings would be your weightings would be 0, 0, 0, term 1 to 3, 1 for the term 4 column, 0 for the term 5 column, and 0 for the 6 and 7 and 8 and 9 and 10 and so on. Now, I know some people would be saying, but hang on, you've entered the final exam mark into this term 6 column. But remember, it doesn't factor in because you entered your own final promotion mark, which includes that exam mark. You only enter that into the term 6 column for reference points and to be able to print a schedule, which you would be able to do by hitting your FET schedule 6, hypothetically speaking. Okay. It could even be slightly the other way around, okay? It could be that you've decided to enter the final promotion mark into term 6. If you've calculated your final promotion mark for the year and you want that mark to display, you enter it into the term 6, and you've decided to enter it into the term 6, should I say, because maybe you entered a class mark into term 4, again, just for display purposes. Then you'd weight your weightings would be 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 1. In other words, the 6th mark is the only mark that we're looking at, and then term 7, 8, 9, 0, 0, 0, 0. And that is pretty much the simplest way to do it. And so you can see that whatever you make your weighting, it's going to arrive at that mark 6p. And that mark 6p is what gets pushed into, and don't get confused here, it gets pushed into the term 4 column, so to speak, in SAMS. Now that isn't a term 4 class mark, kind of like what we were talking about here. That is actually the term 4 mark. That is actually in SAMS, that term 4 mark is actually the final year mark. Okay, if you were to go to the mark books in SAMS, that final mark that would be calculated would be the mark that is pushed through onto the schedule. And that is why I'm saying you need to have your year weightings in place before you do your term 4 export, because that is the mark that's going to be pushed through and shown on the schedules. And in a follow-up tutorial, I'm going to show you where you can print your schedules in SAMS once you've done the export. Now I'm just going to show you quite simply how you can adjust your weightings fairly effectively. Or should I say quicker, basically. Let's say you go to set classes and, all right, the last one I was fiddling with was already set to 0, 0, 0, 1. So I'm just going to change that weighting all the way down. Perhaps I was mistaken. No, actually, after listening to Blaze, we're actually using the 2-3 weighting, okay, because we're entering a mark into. Now, you might have a few different varieties of weightings that you've gathered over the years, but what you do is you find the one that represents what you're seeing in set classes. So I'm seeing 0, 0, 0, 1, 0, 0, 0 in set classes, so I know it's this one here. If I had many weightings, it might be the 4th one down. So you find that one, and I go, okay, no, well, what's actually happening in our schools? We're entering a final SBA mark as a mark out of 100 into front office in the term 4 column, and that must represent 40% of the year. So and then what we're doing is we're entering the final exam mark for the year into front office in the term 6 column, and that is so then we weight that as 3, which is going to end up being 60%. Sorry, I'm stumbling over my words here. It's going to end up being 60% of the year. So now if I go to my set classes, you will see that all of the weightings have changed all the way down the page. Okay, and if I decided that, okay, no, actually what we're doing in our situation is the final promotion marks being entered in the term 6 column, and that's all we want to look at. Okay, then, well, obviously it's all we want to look at because it's the final promotion mark. Then I simply weight 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 1. Okay, and if I go to set classes, you'll see that the weightings have all changed all the way down. Yes, folks, I hope that brings some clarity to the weighting functionality in front of it. That's the year weighting, right? It's not to be confused with the subject weighting. Remember that is how you, in the phase 3 and 2, how you weight your subjects between each other. Okay, so in other words, that's how it calculates the final year aggregate. So the mark 6p is for each subject, and that's the year weighting for each subject. And then to calculate the final year aggregate, it then goes and further factorizes the final mark for each, in other words, the mark 6p for each subject, by these amounts if they're in phase 2 or 3, or the FET factor if they're in the final phase. And so yeah, that's not to be confused with that. That is how the year weightings are done. So in the next tutorial, I'll show you quite simply how we go to SAMs. You're going to be choosing this year. Everybody's going to be choosing this amount here. Okay, and you choose term 4. You click Update Now, and you click well, you can click Export to SAMs if you've had new arrivals or leavers since term 3, or a SAMs Mark Sync if you haven't had any change in your student role. And then once you've done the export, for those of you using your markbooks, just it's better if people have done their uploads from their markbooks before you actually go and do that export. Then I'm just going to quickly show you, because this will be in a follow-up tutorial to that, a third tutorial, but essentially just to give you a rough idea, we'll be opening SAMs. Okay, and you go to section 12, and what you would be going to, and folks, just on a side note, as always, I've always said this before, you see school names, you see names, but everything's mixed and matched in pieces of different data, so none of it's real data, it's all dummy data. So you would then be going to print a department schedule, let's say for example, something like this. Okay, or learners, you can say marks. Okay, and then I would, let's just print this to PDF so you can see it. Okay. It's going to want me to save it. I think I've already got one here. So, alright, let's just replace it. Go to that location. Okay, stop moaning. Okay, we go to and there is your schedule for the Department of Education printed from SAMs. Yes, as I say, but I'll go through that more comprehensively, and then I'm also going to show you how you can use the markbooks in a very simple fashion. Nothing too heavy. You can basically go into the markbook and just capture the year mark, the test mark for the year, the common test mark for the grades 3, 6, and 9s that they wanted to see for maths and home language. All you have to do is copy that column. And I think I did the mathematics one here. Again, I'll show this in a follow-up tutorial, and you'll be able to print. I might not have done that. Did I do English home language? No, bear with me. Afrikaans home language. Perhaps it was grade 6. Okay, I must have refreshed the markbook or something in my testing, but I will show you in a follow-up tutorial how you can enter those marks, do a simple upload to SAMs, and it will put those marks in here for the common test schedules. And then I've come to believe that the E110 and all those forms are not actually printable from SAMs. They're expected to do by hand, so we'll have them printing from FrontOFFICE as per usual. Okay, so that concludes the tutorial on weightings, and there'll be two follow-up tutorials discussing other end-of-year elements. Thank you. Bye.